So in this video, we're going to be talking about the demise of the Arcadia Group, and it's not just down to coronavirus. There's obviously nuance to this. It's the decline of the Arcadia Group has been long running, and it does cause some problems with Philip Green. Causing massive problems with not just the Arcadia Group, but problems he left with BHS. It's mainly to do with pensions liability. So if we look in this article here. Um, So on Sunday, a senior source at Arcadia Group told the BBC's business editor Simon Jack, "We tried to save it a year ago when we put 200 million into the business and the pensions fund, but it's impossible to operate now. There is still a massive pensions liability. So adding to the uncertainty facing the thousands of Arcadia staff is an estimated £350 million hole in the company's pension fund, which has 10,000 members. On Sunday, the chair of the Work and Pensions Committee, Stephen Timms, called on the Green family to plug the gap. Whatever happens to the Arcadia Group, the Green family must make the deficit in the Arcadia Fund," a Labour MP adding that he would raise the matter with the pensions regulator. And so what we can see from this is Philip Green, what he did was he took out a massive dividend from the business. So if we look here, the couple are worth £930 million according to the Sunday Times Rich List. Much of their wealth is a dividend from the £1.2 billion dividend payment Sir Philip Green took from Arcadia and paid to his wife in 2005. Since Lady Green is a resident in Monaco, it was paid tax-free, and I think that it would have been about 200 million pounds in taxes or something like that. If we look here, so it doesn't actually say the amount that it was given tax-free, but it was around £200 million I've read somewhere else. And if we we'll end on an interview here from Channel 4, a really good interview worth listening to. We're going to listen to a lot of it because it's worth listening to. But what we can see from this is that Philip Green bought M&S. Details of the offer. So this is Philip Green's growing empire. So if Philip Green's bid for Marks & Spencer succeeds, the deal will set several financial records. It will be Europe's biggest bid by a private equity-style vehicle. For the first time, an individual's risked almost £1 billion of his own capital in a single investment. But details of the offer will not be settled until next week, but the structure is already clear. It is a leveraged buyout. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, what is a leveraged buyout? So a leveraged buyout is an acquisition of a company using a significant amount of borrowed money to meet the cost of the acquisitions. The assets of the company being acquired are often used as collateral. So what that means is they buy this company out, right, using borrowed money, and they put that loan against the business rather than against themselves. So when the business fails, they are not responsible for the failure, and they're not held liable for the failure. So I hope that makes sense. So what that means is their properties won't be seized. It will be the business's properties that may be seized, and the business's assets that will be seized. And this is something that we saw with Man United. So Man United was bought by a leveraged buyout. We can still see the debt is still a huge problem for the club, although it's financing the debt adequately now. There was a fear that the club would go solvent, a few years just after the purchase because the debt was so high and the TV money wasn't as big as it was. And that's what these sort of people do, these so-called vulture capitalists, or, as they're called by this member of the House of Lords here, asset strippers. Because he's taken the money out through a tax haven, the taxpayer has lost out. And what that means is, the taxman has lost out. Also, there is a pension fund that's built like an insurance thing for pensions. And so what that means is that pensions are protected by a joint fund. But what that means is that it's the working class person, or the pension payer, that's going to bail out billionaire Philip Green, because he took money out of a business and refused to cover the pensions liabilities. He did cover some of it for BHS, but BHS should never have been put in that position. And so Philip Green, became the king of capitalism, the unacceptable face of capitalism because of his actions, taking out this massive dividend in 2005 and sort of living off that money, a tax-free dividend, which is morally wrong. Him taking money out of a business he bought in part through a leverage buyout means that, that business will always be saddled with debt. And that's one of the things that, hampered Toys R Us, because the company was always it was under the ownership of people who didn't care, and for people who just saw it as a money spinner. They didn't care about the business in the end, because if it went bankrupt, they didn't have to pay anything. It's not on them. They've already made the money, right? Through dividends and things like that. So once the business goes bankrupt, they move on to do something else. Philip Green here, talking about the pension fund, the billionaire owner of Topshop and Selfridges, said he was sad he had not received recognition for paying £363 million into the BHS pension scheme, but this is a business that he had taken money out of a dividend, and him doing his own job is laughable, really, because this is a business which he had owned. He sold it for £1. The reason he had sold it was so he wouldn't be liable for the pensions. That's why he did this. He's not, some hero who rolled in, gave £363 million to the pension scheme. He was a guy who took out massive amounts of money from these businesses and never helped them when they needed it. In the good times, he took the money out, didn't reinvest it properly, didn't look after the businesses, and once the business went south, he sold it for £1. He sold it for £1, so he wouldn't be held liable. And it was only through, essentially the government and other, the workers begging him to put money into the pension fund, that money was actually put into the pension fund. And, these sort of leverage buyouts need to be banned because of the danger it causes, and the fact that it can put businesses in a state where the pension funds won't be, their pensions may be not paid in full, because of greedy people like him. He has stolen money from these people, these workers, because as this interview points out, I know this video is getting very rambly, but as this interview points out, a pension is paid in kind by the worker, so that they'll get that money back, and the employer is meant to put money into that pension. By him taking all the money out of this business, once this business goes bankrupt, and if the business can't afford the pension liabilities, then that money was robbed from these workers by this business, if that makes any sense. And so we'll go on to look at this interview. I've sped it up a bit. It's at 1.25 speed. We have to note here that this was a rival of Philip Green who tried to buy some of these businesses that he had purchased. So you can say there's a bit of bias in here, but I feel like the points he's making make a lot of sense. So let's dig into the interview.
Minister under Gordon Brown. He's also a former business rival of Sir Philip Green, having fought off the Arcadia boss's attempt to take over Marks and Spencer's in the early 2000s. Thanks very much for joining us, Lord Miners. This has nothing whatever to do with the pandemic, does it?
No, John, the decline of the Arcadia brands has been ongoing now for the best part of a dozen years.
So what we can see is this is a long-term problem that the company has had. So it's, to say it was down to the pandemic is very lazy.
Sir Philip really only had one strong brand in Topshop. The rest of them were losing market share and becoming increasingly insignificant. He was underinvesting in his stores, and he never really understood online retailing. So whereas other groups were making a transition to online, people like Next and Marks and Spencer, Sir Philip was not doing that.
Because he didn't really care, because this, he thought this business would last long term. And also, if the business went bankrupt, he wouldn't lose a lot, because he's already made the money from it by taking it out via a dividend.
Well, he calls himself a retailer. What do you call him?
I don't think he's a retailer. I think in the 1970s, we used to call people like Sir Philip Green asset strippers.
And what we call them now is vulture capitalists, vultures.
His great skill was in taking assets out of businesses, not investing new money in, and the businesses that he continued to own, he would remove the properties from the business into other offshore companies, which he or his associates and family controlled, and then pay rent to them. The benefit of this, John, was that the cost of the rent reduced his taxable profits in the UK, whilst the rent received was normally overseas, where it suffered no tax at all.
So you see, this whole man's operation is he buys these businesses, transfers the assets out, gives the control of the buildings to people who live offshore in tax havens, so he doesn't have to pay tax on the rent that he is making. This is a massive scam. Well, that's what these people get away with. The fact is that these companies were making money in the UK, were not taxed by the British government, because they couldn't be, because of the way this whole thing was set up. It's a scam inside a scam.
So he was extremely good at financial engineering, but to describe him as a retailer is really to stretch the point. As I said, he only really had one successful brand, Topshop, and that actually had been built up by Miss Shepherd rather than by Mr. Green.
Well, now Mike Ashley has offered him £50 million, but of course Sir Philip has turned it down. Why do you think?
Well, only £50 million is going to make the difference at all. I think we're talking here about a need for several hundreds of millions of pounds. Mike Ashley is a long-term rival of Sir Philip, and I think there's a little bit here of one-upmanship by Ashley making this offer, but £50 million is nothing like enough. And, John, we need to remember these pensioners. They worked the hours for Sir Philip.
This is the point I made about the pensions thing, and this is where I, got the idea from, or sort of understood the argument from, was this interview here. So this is an very important point that he's about to make.
A pension is a form of deferred pay. You've done the work, you get salary, and you get a contribution to your pension. And Sir Philip didn't put the money into the pension scheme. So the employees have done their side of the deal, and now, regardless of whether he has a legal obligation, he really should use some of his massive continuing wealth to ensure that ordinary employees, colleagues, pensioners of the scheme do not suffer.
Well, as I said at the beginning, you're the former city minister. Is there actually a mechanism, particularly as a lot of it's still in offshore accounts, of getting this money off Sir Philip?
No, I think we saw in the case of BHS in the end, out of his generosity of his own heart, he put the money into the BHS scheme. I'm afraid the same thing applies here. Otherwise, the cost will be borne by the Pension Protection Fund, which is a mutual, which is supported by all pension schemes. I mean, somebody pays in the end, John, and it's either Sir Philip or it's the Pension Protection Fund, or because all pensioners who are not currently receiving a pension will suffer a reduction in their pension of at least 10%. It's Sir Philip's own ex-employees, and he really should do the decent thing here. This is a man who likes to boast that he's a knight of the realm and a billionaire. Well, I think he should prove that he's entitled to describe himself as a knight of the realm by doing the right thing.
Lord Minus, thank you for joining us. And Sir Philip Green isn't here, obviously, to defend himself, but Sir Philip, the floor is yours. Anytime you wish to come on, we'll have you on and we'll hear your side of the story.
No chance he's going to go on with a guy like Jon Snow. Brilliant interview, and this was a brilliant interview by Jon Snow. And what we can learn from this is the fact is he's essentially robbed the taxman twofold. He's robbed the taxman twofold. He's robbed it by taking all this money offshore. And now he's robbed the Pension Protection Fund, essentially, because if they're the ones that have to pay out here, what that means is he's taken away pensioners' money. So I'm going to leave it there. This video's gone on long enough. I know I've rambled a fair bit, but I'm very angry at the situation because there are a lot more businesses that do this sort of stuff. He's not a retailer, as Lord Minus puts out. He's a scam artist. He's a vulture capitalist. He's an asset stripper, and that's what they do. They take the money, they put it in offshore places, they give it to their family, things like that. So the taxman doesn't get any of it. So that money made in the UK doesn't stay here. And when times are bad, like they are now, he won't put the money in the business because he doesn't care. Because if this business goes bankrupt, he'll do the same thing again. He'll find another business that's struggling. He'll buy it. He'll take control of it. He'll put all the money offshore, and then once that goes bankrupt, he'll move on again. So, hopefully you can understand the points I've made in the video. I know it's not the clearest. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.